Hello students, today's topic is sexual reproduction in flowering plants or angiosperms. In flowering plants, the flower encloses the reproductive parts of a plant. Therefore, the flowers are known as the reproductive organ in a plant. In most flowering plants, male and female reproductive parts are present in the same flower. For example, in mustard, hibiscus, and many more. Such type of flowers are called bisexual flowers. There are some flowers in which either the male or the female organ is present, as in papaya and watermelon. They are called unisexual flower. The sexual reproduction in flowering plant can be divided into various subtopics like the structure of the typical flower, the process of reproduction and seed formation in flowering plant, fertilization process, and the post-fertilization changes that take place in the flower. The first topic is about the structure of a typical flower. A flower is born at the tip of a stalk called pedicel. The pedicel expands into a fleshy, swollen upper portion called thalamus, which is also known as receptacle. All flower parts are attached to the thalamus. A typical flower consists of four main roles. They are the calyx, the corolla, the androecium, and the gynoecium. Now, before going in details about the sexual reproduction in flowering plant, let me discuss about the structure of a flower. Here you can see I have taken a bisexual flower, China rose. As I have discussed before, what is a bisexual flower? So here in this flower you can get both the male and the female reproductive structure. Let me discuss how to understand a bisexual flower. So in a flower there are reproductive as well as non-reproductive parts. These colorful parts of the flower are the non-reproductive part known as the petals. You can see here there are 5 petals in this flower, right? Now these 5 petals collectively known as corolla. The function of the corolla is to attract the insects or the pollinators for pollination. The other non-reproductive part are at the back of the flower. These are the green structure, which are also 5 in number. You can see these are the sepals. The sepals are collectively called the calyx. You can see here another green structure present below the calyx. These are called epicalyx. You can see both the calyx and the epicalyx are green in color. That means they help in photosynthesis. As well as when the flower is in the bud condition, the calyx protect the bud. Well, let's discuss about the parts, the calyx. Calyx is the outermost whorl of the flower. It is formed of 5 green colored leaf-like parts called sepals. Their function is to protect the flower in the bud condition. The corolla. Corolla is formed of the colored petals. They lie near the calyx or the sepals. They are found in various colors. Their bright color serves to attract the insects for pollination. Androecium. It is the male reproductive whorl of the flower. It is formed of stamens. They just lie within the corolla. There may be several stamens in a flower. Each stamen consists of 2 parts, a filamentous stalk and a swollen bilobed anther. The anther bears 4 pollen sacs. Inside each pollen sac, there is a yellow powdery mass called pollen. The pollen consists of numerous pollen grains. They are the male gametes. Now let's discuss about the gynoecium or the pistil. Gynoecium is the female reproductive part of a flower. It is formed of 1 or more carpels. Carpel lies in the center of the flower as a flask-shaped structure. The carpel is made up of 3 main parts: the stigma, the style, and the ovary. The stigma is the upper terminal part of a carpel. It receives the pollen grain, or we may say it is the landing platform of the pollen during pollination. Style. It is the middle long part of the carpel which connects the stigma to the ovary. The ovary. The basal swollen part of carpel is ovary. Ovary bears several ovules. A female gamete called ovum or egg is produced in each ovule. The ovary may be unilocular, when there is only one chamber, or multilocular when there are many chambers. Now the next topic is the process of reproduction and seed formation in plant. The process of reproduction and seed formation in plant includes the various stages. They are the pollination, fertilization and post-fertilization changes, or seed and fruit formation. So first is pollination. The pollination is the process of the transfer of the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. It is of two types, self and cross. Now what is self-pollination? It is the transfer of the pollen grain from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or of another flower of the same plant. For example, in case of groundnut or viola or oxalis, this type of self-pollination may take place. Cross-pollination. It is the transfer of pollen grain from the anther from one plant to the stigma of another flower of the another plant, but of the same species. It may take place in China rose, hemp, maize, castor, etc. Cross-pollination may be completed with the help of insects, birds, wind, or water. So here we can differentiate the two. In self-pollination, as we can see, flowers are usually not attractive because they do not require such pollinators or agents for pollination. But in cross-pollination, flowers are brightly colored and attractive to attract the pollinators because they need some external agent like wind, water, bird, insect for pollination. Now in case of the abiotic agent, color or bright color may not play an important role, but in case of the pollination by the living organisms like bird and insect, the flowers obviously require some bright color to attract the insects and birds. Now in case of self-pollination, the flowers do not produce any nectar or any scent, but in case of cross-pollination, the flower produces nectar and scent that acts as a reward for the pollinators. In case of self-pollination, the parental character are preserved because they are genetically same, so no variation takes place. But in cross-pollination, parental character are not preserved because new varieties may develop due to variations, as the genes or the inheritance may be changed because of the transfer of the gametes from other genetically different flowers. Now before we move on to the fertilization process, we need to know about the components present in the embryo sac. So what are they? The mature embryo sac consists of 4 cell types. First cell type are the egg cell and the 2 synergid at the micropylar end, the antipodal cells which are present at the chalazal end, and the central cell containing the 2 polar nuclei and a large central vacuole. Now the question comes in your mind, what is the micropylar end and what is the chalazal end, right? Let me discuss this. Chalazal end is the basal part of the plant ovule where the nucellus is fused. Micropylar end is a tiny opening in the ovule through which the pollen tube enters. The next is fertilization. The fusion of the male and the female gamete, that is the male nucleus from the pollen grain with the egg nucleus to form a zygote, is called fertilization. As a result of pollination, the pollen grain is deposited on the stigma of carpel. It grows into the pollen tube. The pollen tube pierces the stigma and grows through the style. It enters the ovary and then it enters through a small opening called micropyle. The pollen tube contains the 2 male gamete. It releases the 2 male gamete in the embryo sac. One of the male gamete fuses with the egg to form the zygote. This fusion of the male gamete with that of the egg to form a zygote is called syngamy. Now what's about the other male gamete? The other male gamete fuses with the 2 polar nuclei to form endosperm. This fusion of one male gamete with two polar nuclei is called triple fusion, because here three cells are fused, one male gamete and two polar nuclei. In the ovary, two fusions takes place, one is syngamy, another is triple fusion. So hence this process is called double fertilization. Now let's move on to the post-fertilization changes. The post-fertilization changes result in the formation of seed. These changes include the zygote divides several times to form an embryo within the ovule. The embryo possesses a radicle, there is a tiny root, a plumule, a tiny shoot, and the cotyledons to store the food. The ovule changes into seed. Ovary wall forms the fruit wall called the pericarp. The ovary changes into fruit. The wall of ovule forms a protective seed coat called the testa. The other parts of the flower like sepals, petals, stamen and style and stigma fall off because they have no other use now. Thus the ovary wall forms a pericarp, the fruit wall, the ovule develops into seed and the wall of ovule forms the protective seed coat. On getting favorable environmental conditions, the seed germinates to form a small seedling which finally grows into a plant. Finally, the seed contains the future plant or embryo. The embryo develops into a seedling under favorable conditions. This process of development of seedling from a seed is called germination. So my dear students, it was all about the structure of an angiospermic flower, the fertilization process, pollination and germination. Hope you found the content interesting. If you have found it interesting, do share it with your friends and don't forget to press the like button. If you have not yet subscribed my channel, do subscribe it. Thanks for watching.